So I said to our guys, to hell with it. We're going to go and lower the boom here. And we're going to be firmly on the side of Mandela in South Africa. And we are going to reject the arguments that Mandela is a communist. As I said to them, how would you know he's a communist? He's been in jail for 27 years. Has he spoken to you lately? The answer, of course, was no. Well, why do you say these things?
Where Montreal calls in and speaks out. The Elias Macco Show. CJAD 800.
Brian Mulroney there on another great statesman, Nelson Mandela, and of course, Brian Mulroney in Canada's role during the apartheid years and the end of apartheid. Let's go now to Jason Moscovitz, a former national affairs correspondent and a chief political correspondent for the CBC, and he was there during the years of Brian Mulroney. In fact, you covered his leadership campaign in 1983. Jason, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So, what was your feelings when you heard the news yesterday?
Oh, boy, how an era had passed. We had seen a man who had never been elected to anything become prime minister in 18 months. And so much of that was absolute personality. Brian Mulroney had a personality that nobody, I don't think, could match. His eyes just sparkled, the smile, always slapping people on the back, making them feel good. There were extremes to his personality sometimes. You know, I recall the first time meeting him in Montreal at his home, doing an interview with him when he was running for the leadership, and I couldn't understand why this man talking to me, a reporter who he had never met, why there were so many F words. He was trying to get me on his side, and he thought talking like that would get him there. Personality. Yeah. I don't know if we'll ever have a prime minister with a personality like that.
Can you take us through that leadership bid, that whirlwind run, and then that crushing win in 84? Take us through those times.
Mulroney ran in 76, and he was criticized for being too flashy, driving around in big limousines. So in 1983, he would pick up his own suitcase in the airport when the camera was there. And he would always have an organizer pick him up in the oldest jalopy they could find. Uh-huh. He was going to beat the image. And the thing about Mulroney is that he learned his lesson so quickly. It was his intelligence. I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit to make the point. His first day in question period, when he was leader of the opposition, Lloyd Axworthy embarrassed him. And he embarrassed him because Mulroney made the classic mistake. He asked a question he didn't know the answer to. I met Mulroney on the Hill later that afternoon. He was in his car. He saw me. The car stopped. He rolled down the back window, and he told me, "I'm embarrassed. This will never happen again. I promise." Talking to me, but more talking to himself.
And as prime minister, how did he set himself apart?
He took on things. He took on apartheid, and you reported on that very well. The only thing I would add is that Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were dead set against it, and he was in opposition to them. And he never backed down. The goods and services tax, which people probably still dislike, I'm sure they still dislike it. It took so much guts and so much character for him to get that through. And it did wonderful things for Canada. I mean, nobody likes to pay it. And, you can't talk in terms of today's debt and deficit because of COVID and government spending and a lot of other things. But at the time, it really cleaned up the economy. And it wasn't so much during Mulroney's time. It made Chrétien's life a lot easier. And hopefully when we get our debt under control again, the goods and service tax will be a positive thing.
How do you view, I know it's controversial. NAFTA was also controversial, and how he viewed Canada on the world stage and Canada as a player on the world stage when he was Prime Minister?
Well, again, it was his personality. When he was opposition leader, Ronald Reagan was president. An opposition leader from Canada, or from any other country, I'm sure, was never received as a guest at the White House. Brian Mulroney managed to go and see Ronald Reagan and have a news conference afterward in the Rose Garden as opposition leader. And that's the kind of personality power that he used in his relations with world leaders. He never went unnoticed. And he was incredibly articulate in any venue. Brian Mulroney shone.
Jason, you had the good fortune of covering Brian Mulroney during those consequential times. Of all the leaders that you covered in your time as a journalist, where does he rank?
An interesting question. When somebody passes away, one talks about all the virtuous things for very good reason. There was a side of Brian Mulroney that wasn't so virtuous, and you could say that of any human being. But I just want to, recount this. People forget about it. In the leadership campaign in 1983, I met him at the airport called Dorval then, and we were flying to Baie-Comeau, a little plane. And there had been a story in Le Devoir that morning that Mulroney didn't have a constitutional position. And on the plane, my cameraman was sitting next to him. And at the end of the flight, the cameraman came over to me, Jerry Beauchamp, he said, "Jason, you wouldn't believe what just happened." I said, "What happened?" He said, "Mulroney wrote a 10-point constitutional position on the back of a barf bag."
Wow.
And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, he did." I said, "How do you know that?" And he said, "Well, Mulroney said to him, I only got to 9 points. Read this over and see if you could find a 10th. Needless to say, in Baie-Comeau, he had a constitutional position. Now, you would think the story ended there, but it doesn't. Years later, I met the person who drove for him during the leadership campaign. And I said, "Remember the day of the barf bag?" And he said, yeah, of course. He said, "I have the barf bag." And I said, "How?" And he said, "At the end of that day, Mulroney signed it and gave it to me and said, 'Peter, hold on to this. One day it will really be worth something.'"
Wow. Jason, what a story right there. I got to let you go. We're running up against the clock, but I thank you so much for coming on this morning. I really appreciate your insight and the stories of those years.
Thank you very much.
Jason Moscovitz right there, former national affairs and political correspondent for the CBC for many decades.
He was involved in many controversial files, and it's better to be involved than not to be involved. Many times we did not agree, but in reality, in 3 different referendums, we were on the same side. He was himself from a minority. He was Anglo in Quebec, while I was Franco in the rest of the land. And, but it was possible coming from rural Quebec to move up the ladder to be Prime Minister of Canada, as he was, very successful one. And I would like to offer to him and his family my most sincere condolence, and they can be proud of their father.
Time for your take on the morning's hot topics. Call Elias at 514-790-0800 or text at 514-800.
Jean Chrétien on Brian Mulroney. Let's try and get as many of your stories of the former Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, passing away yesterday, age of 84, as we can as we end off this hour. I'm going to start off here with Dr. Clifford Albert, who is on the line. Dr. Albert, welcome to the show.
How are you, Elias?
I'm
Good
doing.
to talk to you again.
I'm doing great here, and I want to know your stories about driving Brian Mulroney in your Ferrari.
I have a great number of stories. I've been lucky over my career to have met 5 prime ministers. I met Pierre Trudeau outside the McIntyre Medical Building years ago when I was a medical student. Many times because he was always walking up Pine Avenue. I met Kim Campbell. I've met Joe Clark. I've met Stephen Harper and Brian Mulroney. And Brian Mulroney, I met him many times over the years, and the guy was just such a great orator. I mean, he had this commanding voice that you just can't underestimate what charisma and humor can do. Because the guy always had an amazing anecdote that he would deliver with humor, which would deliver his point. And I've met him several times in political spheres because I was always kind of involved in politics. And I'd met him once at an event where he had been a consultant to Maxime Bernier when Maxime Bernier was running for the leadership of the Conservative Party. And he really had encouraged him to stay in, even after, to stay in the Conservative Party after Andrew Scheer won, saying because the knives come out.
Yeah.
The knives always come out in the Conservative Party, and Andrew Scheer, if he doesn't win, will be out soon after. But I once had met him outside my office, and I was driving around in my convertible, and I stop and I say hello, and he says, "Hi, Cliff." And I say, "I'm in a 1993 vintage Ferrari," and I say, "Can I offer you a lift somewhere?" And he said, "Well, I'm waiting for my limo, but let's go for a ride." I took him for a ride around the block. He was just an incredible, the amount of, no matter whether you spent a minute or 10 minutes with him or an hour, the guy really made you feel that you had done something for him than the other way around. And he took on challenges, and I spoke to him about this a couple of times, taking on things like apartheid, taking on things like the free trade agreement, taking on the GST. These were difficult, controversial changes in politics that really cost him his prime ministership. When he was so reviled for bringing in the GST, that he had an amazing ability to note the pulse of the people. And although they were difficult decisions to take, he took them because he knew that in the end it was the right thing to do for the country and the right thing to do for humanity. And he always stuck to his guns, which was incredible. But he always delivered it with humor. If you think back to what he did with Ronald Reagan, he sang with Ronald Reagan when Irish eyes are smiling.
Yes.
And that moment has never been equaled in Canadian politics.
Dr. Albert, I want to make sure we have some time for some of our other listeners to get a story on air here. But just to your point about the humor, I got a text message from a listener. Deegan writes us this, and he recounts the story of when Mulroney was asked if he would attend the unveiling of Pierre Elliott Trudeau's portrait in the lobby of Parliament. And Mulroney's response said, "Are you kidding? When I heard they were hanging Trudeau in the lobby, I cleared my agenda to be there." The great Irish sense of humor. And it's those little anecdotes and that humor that he had, which is so powerful. Dr. Albert, thanks so much.
Coming from Baie-Comeau, he spoke to me about this. Coming from the background that he came in from, you got to realize this guy came from a very, very poor upbringing to become Prime Minister of Canada. Incredible story.
Incredible. Yeah,
incredible story.
Thanks so much for sharing. And if you ever want to give me a lift in a Ferrari, I'm game as well. Thanks so much.
Anytime,
Clifford Albert right there. Let me scooch over to Kathleen in Westmount. Hi, Kathleen.
How are you?
I'm doing well. What would you like to say about Brian Mulroney?
Well, it's more about his mom and the humble kind of woman that she was. But she was attending a wedding of our family, and in the lineup for the bar, the gentleman said, "Please pass ahead of us, and what can we get you?" And whatever. She was close to 90, and he said, they started chatting her up, and where are you from? I'm from Baie-Comeau. Baie-Comeau, geez, an Anglophone from Baie-Comeau. Oh, Mary, where? And do you have any kids? Yeah, I've got this one and my son and this. Oh, where all your kids live? Well, my son Brian lives in Ottawa, and my son, and he was prime minister at the time. So, the guys, after she took her drink and she walked away, they turned to me and they said, "There's only one Mulroney we know, or there's only one person we know that's an Anglophone in Baie-Comeau, and that would be the Mulroney family." And I said, "Well, that was Mary." Huh. And they scooted over to give her a toast on her drink and said, "What a great son you have."
Wow, that's that's very humble how that how Mother Mulroney handled that. Kathleen,
absolutely, totally humble woman, unpretentious, and you know what? I've asked my dear friend, the Honorable Jerry Weiner, who is the Minister of Immigration, to call into the show or to call into iHeart and talk about his years with him. And you're just two gentlemen, absolute great men.
Kathleen, listen, thanks for that. I really do appreciate you sharing that lovely story. Let me head over to Al in Roxborough. Al, if you can be quick, you get the last word on Brian Mulroney. Oh, do we have Al?
Yes, hello.
Hey, Al, if you can be quick, give us your story about Brian Mulroney.
Well, I was fortunate enough to meet Mr. Mulroney in 2007 during the funeral for, the wake actually, or at the Dr. Bibb Dickey's, who was his father-in-law, funeral. And I was really surprised at how easy it was to talk to somebody who led the country. It was almost like speaking to a rock star. You were kind of in awe of this great personality, a gentleman, and he was really good at making people feel comfortable and at ease. He had a sense of humor, and I'd like to say is that if I came away with any one thing about him, was that I felt that he was an extraordinary person with amazing abilities that I felt in awe of, basically.
Al, thanks. Al, I got to leave it there. I want to thank you so much. But listen, I think you're reiterating the fact that he was a giant, both figuratively and literally.